main one that has kind of cropped up is around fodder and fodder security, and I suppose some of the options that farmers can take around current milk price with regards culling cows, milking on cows maybe once a day, and then obviously some of the feed options that are available. Are they economically viable options? That they're kind of some of the questions that have been posed to me in particular in the Mayo region, but I suppose it is around the country where these kind of questions are being asked.
I'm joined this week by Ronan Mulligan, Teagasc Dairy Advisor based in Claremorris, County Mayo. Ronan's going to give us an update on the current situation within his own client base and maybe offer some tips and advice for farmers over the coming weeks. A little bit of respite, I suppose, with regards to the weather in the last couple of weeks, Ronan. So I suppose that has improved mood within the farming community.
Aye, absolutely. Sure. The last week it's been great. Like the sun has been out. Farmers definitely the mood has improved, and they've just been able to sit down, I suppose, and take stock of things, and it's also provided an excellent opportunity to try and get a bit of slurry out on farm. So it has the current conditions.
Yeah, you've had, I suppose, discussion groups over the recent weeks. I suppose, what has been the main topics of discussion within those?
Yeah, look, I suppose there's three groups in actually in the Mayo kind of region, and on the last round of group meetings, I suppose the key kind of topics have been around that slurry question, replacement heifers, soil fertility. But the main one that has kind of cropped up is around fodder and fodder security, and I suppose some of the options that farmers can take around the current milk price with regards culling cows, milking on cows maybe once a day. And then obviously some of the feed options that are available, are they economically viable options? That they're kind of some of the questions that have been posed to me in particular in the Mayo region, but I suppose it is around the country where these kind of questions are being asked.
And maybe to dig into some of those, where are farmers at within the region in terms of winter feedstocks? Has many completed budgets, and how are they looking?
Yeah, look, so I suppose there was kind of there was a survey done by Teagasc in the last week or two, and some of the results coming back show that there is that little bit of a deficit on farms. So I suppose like in the northwest region, kind of, and I'd see it kind of among the groups, 55% of the farmers said they were sufficient. While 22% of farms said they had significant deficits on farms. So there is it's very mixed. It's very mixed, and there is some decisions definitely to be made around securing fodder for the winter. But I suppose in Mayo we're kind of, and in the West we're kind of lucky is that in the fact that there is kind of that higher there is a higher availability of silage, albeit lower quality. There is a higher availability of it.
Yeah, so there's feed available within the region. And is that the option? You mentioned a couple of options there. Obviously, you can go to the market and purchase feed. Is that the one farmers are taking? Or you did mention there are other ones around maybe reducing stock and maybe getting rid of some cull cows. What are the questions, or what are you thinking on that?
Yeah, look, I suppose it's a mixed bag. So some guys are taking that decision to get rid of the culls, straight away, depending, I suppose, how they're milking. Then there's other alternative options that farmers are taking. They're up in the meal. Up in the meal is, I suppose, one option. And then there's other options such as palm kernels, soya hulls, etc. But I suppose the key thing, I suppose, if you are going in with an alternative feed like soya hulls or meal, it is important that you do restrict the wire on the cows, because the substitution rate isn't the same for meal versus grass. And where your demand, where you might think it's 30 or 40, in actual fact it could be closer to 45 or 50.
And is there any advice then, Ronan, with regards, where is that point, I suppose, where people maybe should start looking at letting off those lower performing cull cows? It's obviously there's a cost to keeping them. I know milk price is on the rise, but there has to be a kind of a cut off point there where you're saying, do you know what, it'd be better to maybe move off a percentage of these lower performing ones.
Yeah, definitely. And the first thing is fodder must be secured, and um, I suppose the more culls that you get rid of, the longer you're going to be out of grass. Like just kind of looking at some of the local groups here, like the farm cover, I suppose, is a little off target on farm. We're seeing a growth rate this week of between 50 and 60 on farms. So there is still an opportunity there to build. So your decisions should definitely be with regard to getting as long as you can at grass, your winter feed situation, and then I suppose how well them cows are milking. Like I suppose if the cow, if the culls, which in a lot of cases if they are milking up 18, 19, 20 liters, it probably does pay to keep them on. But if they're lower than that, if they're 13, 12 liters, there is a slight gain in it, but in terms of taking into account everything, it might be just the best thing to do to make a culling decision around them.
To move them on, as you say, in terms of the margin, obviously isn't
Yeah,
as big with those cows. Yeah. Um,
yeah.
you mentioned there in terms of the grass situation, where is average farm cover actually at? Growths obviously have jumped a bit in the last week with the weather conditions, which is great to see. Where is average farm cover and
Yeah,
demand on farm?
so average farm cover is sitting at 950 at the minute. It's a little bit off target, but I suppose in the last kind of few years, especially here in Mayo, kind of farmers, I suppose, have got stung in October, where we've had a lot of poor weather and they haven't been able to get that grazing done, and as a result, then they've carried big covers into the spring, and I suppose that is kind of leaving us just a little bit on the conservative side, and we're not building enough. So if you're on a wetter farm, I suppose, like we really should be striving to get towards 1,000. And you probably have a week to do so.
Mm.
And if you're on a drier farm, it's 1,100. Like if we're looking at demand currently on a few of our farms here in Mayo, demand is sitting at 45, and that's been put in with 15 kilos of grass and 4 a meal and 1 a silage. So for farmers, so there's not a lot of silage going in,
Mm.
good bit of meal going in. It'd be important that the wire is up if you do want to restrict intake and use the next week to build some covers on farm.
Yeah. But that's it. Really, as you said, the cow has to be fed. But the fact is, the additional concentrates going in there, and it's a matter of giving your 12-hour breaks, then just giving your appropriate allocations of grass. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very good. You mentioned it earlier, chemical fertilizer and spreading window was obviously now closed, but the advice for farmers around, you said questions around slurry, soil fertility was coming up. What is the advice around, or what's been said out there with regards slurry? There's a short period left to get that out. Lime conditions are pretty good on farms, and maybe even K. Some farms have took third cuts. We know silage cuts are heavy on K. So what's the
Yeah.
conversation out there?
Yeah, so look, I suppose like in that, firstly, kind of just touching on the slurry, like in that kind of survey that went out a number of weeks ago, like 54% of tanks had not been emptied. So there's still a significant proportion of slurry on farm, and we do want to get them tanks empty before winter housing. So like we would want to be firstly targeting that slurry on the ground that needs it most, which is probably your silage ground. There's massive offtakes on them second and third cuts of silage. Like each ton of dry matter removes up to 4 kilos of P and 25 kilos of K. So it's a huge amount taken off, and it's important that we try and recycle the nutrients and get that slurry back out onto our silage ground. And I know that isn't always possible, but look, that's the best thing that we can try and do at farm level to increase our indexes.
There was a study there too, I think, in terms of looking at over the last couple of years, looking at slurry storage, and there's a large percentage of farms that have a lot of slurry actually in tanks at that close period. So when we're talking about storage, I think it's important farmers, Ronan, take the opportunity now to to get those slurry tanks emptied when conditions are good and head into that closed period with full capacity within those tanks.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge amount of farmers that go in, and it's just probably down to a labour thing where they just haven't had the time to go and empty them tanks fully or whatever it is. It's just hugely important that we go and get them tanks empty heading into the closed period. Like we know slurry storage is tight on a lot of farms. We can't be going in with 10% of tanks full of slurry. It's shooting yourself in the foot straight away. So it is.
Is there much lime going out on farms, or are farmers even talking about that kind of? Obviously, there's no closed limitations, we'll say, on potash.
Yeah.
What's your advice around that?
So look, I suppose it's an ideal time obviously to get that lime out. Or we know that like in Mayo, 85% of our soils are suboptimal for soil fertility. So there's huge work to be done on correcting our pH. And you do find, I suppose, that like if you correct your pH status and your K, it will release an awful lot of P in farms. Like we do a lot of, I suppose, giving out about P allowances or whatever it is. The two almost non-limiting nutrients that will give you as much value for money is lime and potash. Like we do need to be getting lime out. Now is an optimal time to go with it. Look at your soil results, consult your advisor, and then I suppose regarding K, it's an excellent opportunity as well to get out K. K is non-limiting, so you can go basically all year round. And I suppose a rule of thumb, one bag of 50% muriate of potash will bring up an index. So yeah, we should really be considering going with K. And as well as that, there's a high volume of P and K within your slurry.
One question, Ronan, which I meant to ask you when we were talking about the winter feed situation, was the test and the silage. And I suppose that's going to be important in terms of farmers knowing what the quality of silage is like in the yard if they are supplementing with other things or trying to stretch silage reserves. Has any farmers tested silage quality yet? And I suppose what's your advice for farmers around that?
Yeah, look, just briefly talking to one or two of my clients here in the Mayo region, like they have got their silage tested and they have been a little bit surprised about what has come back. Silage that they would have anticipated being 75, 80% dry matter digestibility has come back 70%. So like they're straight away. They know obviously what now they're feeding, but there is a predicament there in terms of they thought they'd have more milking cow silage in the yard, and now they realise that their silage isn't adequate. So there will be, for the likes of them farmers, there will be decisions to be made. But I just can't stress the importance of just getting your silage tested. You essentially don't know what you're feeding if you don't get your silage tested. It's you can get it done here through Teagasc, or you can get it done through some of the co-ops within the region. But yeah, it's important that that's done, yeah, at farm level.
Know what you're feeding, and I suppose know what you have in your yard, and then you'll be supplementing accordingly, based on that as an important
Absolutely,
message.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Couple of other points, and I know that there's been work you've been doing within your groups over the last period. Weighing a replacement heifers, that's one that if it isn't done on farms, ideally it should be being done on a continual basis. But if it isn't, it's probably something that needs to happen now heading into the back end, especially those 0-to-1s.
Yeah, absolutely. I think weighing your replacements is it's an essential part of it. Like we know the impact that underweight replacements can have on your farm business, and you going around, you can see it on the farms that are consistently bringing through underweight heifers, where you have issues with regards longevity in the herd, fertility in the herd, milk production in the herd. It's a hugely important task that I suppose is overlooked on a lot of farms, and that may be down to a number of things such as labour or whatever else. But it's very important. Like in our local group here, the R1s and the R2 replacements were weighed, and there was a significant percentage of them underweight. So just going into the winter, some of the management decisions that you can take around your replacement heifers is basically your highest quality feed into the yard. goes into your R1s in particular. It's there's you're not going to be feeding as much of it. There's a lower demand on them replacement heifers. It's a no-brainer to give them the highest quality feed that you have. And I suppose then you can act around whether do them heifers need soya or whatever intervention measures based on what your silage quality is like. But it's important that you just give them the highest quality stuff that you have on the farm.
Yeah, and even I suppose if there is a percentage of them, 25 or 30% of these replacements, separating them in the shed and giving them a bit of preferential treatment when they are housed later on in the autumn is something that should be done as well.
Absolutely. And I think James, it's very much worth noting that like weighing scales are available under the TAMS Farm Safety Capital Investment Scheme at 60% grant aid. So like if you have no scales either, it's a no-brainer to put in for one. If you can get your replacement heifers right and get their weights right, it has a very, very quick return on investment there on it.
So what you're really saying to me, Ronan, is there's no excuses?
Absolutely not. No excuses not to be weighing your replacement heifers on farm level.
Anything else popping up there? I suppose bits of advice for farmers over the coming weeks. What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so look, I suppose get another milk recording in would be another important. As we're coming into dry off, it'll be important to get another milk recording in and basically on there is a lot of decisions now you can make regarding persistently infected cows, SCC. There's important culling decisions that you can make. And then the one thing I suppose I would on that last, as you're coming up to drying off cows, make sure you record your dry off dates in order to generate that annual report from your milk recording, which is an invaluable report at farm level in helping to identify your poor performing cows, your high somatic cell count cows, and your highest performing cows within your herd. And then the other thing I suppose to look at then is in that survey again, I keep on alluding back to it, but cash flow was identified as an issue on farm level. So it's very very important that you do complete a cash flow budget for the next 6 months and really keep a good cost structure over the next 6 months, because we know costs are fluctuating. We know you're getting there's kind of good milk checks coming in the post at the minute. It's just important to keep the income from the milk checks and not go out and spend that money foolishly. So like the advice will be definitely to consult your advisor, to talk to your advisor, sit through a cash flow budget. It's very simple to complete and very important.
People, Ronan, nearly shy away from it, thinking it has to be complicated, but it's nearly as easy as what's the incomings, what's the outgoing. And I suppose we would have always, for farmers, need to know if that period where milk checks obviously are maybe reduced or maybe ceased on some farms that dry off for the month of January, what level of capital is actually needed to carry you through until those good milk checks start coming again.
Absolutely. I think that's the key question, James.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So look, I think there's lots of good advice, good insight as to what's happening within your own clients' farms. Recently, as you say, the big one conversation is around winter feed. Important that farmers act on that if there is deficits, managing that autumn grass, making sure the cow, obviously, as you said, is well fed, but managing that accordingly if there is silage going in to stretch that, or meals, that you are on your 12-hour break. And then the tips around replacement heifers, getting your milk recording booked and cash flow. So loads of really good tips there, Ronan. So look, thanks for joining me on the Dairy Edge podcast. That's it for this week's show, folks. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.